Today we're going to be talking about the Winter Storm Uri impact on the Texas power grid and how the Earthmover platform, including the Era 5 weather reanalysis and then open source software tools like Xarray and Icechunk can be used to understand how that event played out and how you can build a data system for analytics and modeling in the weather and energy space. So we're going to hop in. There's going to be some slides. There's going to be some live demo, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions near the end. So to start, let's take a look at Winter Storm Uri. So in the dark days of the COVID-19 pandemic, we also had Winter Storm Uri in February of 2021. And this was a major winter storm that hit a large part of the US and hit Texas particularly hard. And so, up on the screen here is, are some clippings from a bunch of the news postings at the time, but, all across the US, there were, extreme cold temperatures, including, sub-freezing temperatures all the way down to the, Texas-Mexico border. And this had huge impacts on the energy grid. Of course, that's what we're going to talk about today, but also on other parts of society. So the storm in Texas alone killed almost 200 or over 200 people and resulted in over $100 billion of property and other related damages. So big storm, and weather was a big part of that. And so today we're going to be talking about how we can use the tooling available to better understand how this storm played out, but also how future events like this can be modeled and understood. And so a little more on the energy impact of how this storm went down. In mid-February, there were 4 days of extreme cold temperatures, combined with underproduction of electricity, led to rolling and then eventually just extended blackouts across the ERCOT grid in Texas. The forecast was purportedly not stellar at the time, and so they missed both kind of the timing and the severity of the temperature extremes. And as a result, ERCOT underestimated the peak energy demand by a pretty large margin of 14% or so. The result in the trading and operation space for energy was over $10 billion in losses across investor-owned power companies and traders. And S&P Global had this nice quote. Only a few companies came out ahead, and most people lost in this event. It was very disruptive. So that's Winter Storm Uri. We'll come back to it in a little bit. What I'm going to do is spend a few minutes talking about what we've been working on at Earthmover, try to set the stage for why we think that the platform has utility in this space, and then we're going to switch back to Winter Storm Uri. I'll talk about some analytics we might want to do to understand the storm in more detail, and then I have a demo prepared that will use Earthmover and some Python notebooks to explore the event using some analytics and modeling, and finally we'll take some questions at the end. So a little bit about Earthmover before we get into the demo. We are a public benefit corporation with a mission to solve humanity's greatest challenges, or to help people solve humanity's greatest challenges. And both my co-founder, Ryan, and I, we were scientists before starting the company. I spent 6 years at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, and Ryan was a professor at Columbia for 10 years. We really cut our teeth trying to work with weather and climate data at scale, and found ourselves working more and more on software and data tooling to help people and our own research groups work with this type of data. So during that time, we started the Pangeo project, We worked heavily on Xarray and Zarr, two open source Python projects that we'll use today in the demo, and really worked on building the bridge for scientific data into the cloud. And out of that grew the Earthmover company. So a bit more about our open source stack here. I think many folks on the call will be quite familiar with some of these and probably use them in their day-to-day data operations. But starting with Xarray. So Xarray is a toolkit, a data model, and an API for working with labeled in-dimensional arrays. So the sort of data that comes out of a weather model, a forecast model. If you're familiar with NetCDF as a data format, Xarray was really built to handle that data model at scale and make it really easy to do analytics. And so we work heavily on the Xarray project still, continue to support it and develop on it, and it's widely used across this field. Next is Zarr. So Zarr is a cloud-native container for in-dimensional arrays built for scale. So Zarr allows you to store arrays or tensors with state-of-the-art chunking and compression. It's really optimized for cloud object storage, and it's become the standard format for AI weather data sets and analytics-ready data sets. And then finally is the most recent project we've been working on at Earthmover, a project called Icechunk. And Icechunk is a transactional backend for Zarr. So Zarr is great. We call it vanilla Zarr sometimes, and then we have Icechunk. Icechunk is a backend that enables database-like ACID transactions, data versioning, and time travel on top of Zarr. And it's written in Rust. It's open source, Apache licensed, and it is free to use. And so we'll be using all three of these projects in the demo today. So what are the problems we're trying to solve at Earthmover? So the first is a problem that we see across so many different applications is just building data systems around scientific data is hard and can be messy and often leads to a data swamp that looks something like the diagram on the left. You have data sources coming in all sorts of different file formats and different metadata conventions and all of this from different APIs. And the system for organizing that data often ends up being ad hoc and pretty messy. And so the Earthmover platform is really built around the idea of analysis-ready, cloud-optimized data cubes, the ability to cleanly organize your data catalog, update that using transactions, have audit logs on top of how the data was modified, and then of course govern who can access it. So it's really a system for organizing how you think about your data system. So the next problem we're working on solving is the I/O performance part of the equation. And so, just storing your data in the cloud, it certainly solves some problems, but we're working with petabyte-sized data sets in many cases. And so how do you do that performantly and efficiently? And many of the kind of archival file formats, things like NetCDF and GRIB and HDF, weren't built for the cloud. And so they often struggle to utilize the resources available to them. And so, mostly through Icechunk, we have really tuned the I/O layer to improve the rate at which you can read and write data from the cloud. And that has big impacts on what you're able to do on the modeling and analytics side. And then finally, is this the problem of how are you going to build efficient and streamlined data pipelines that you can maintain over time? And what we see is just a wild mess of loosely connected components in many data systems out there that rely on these archival file formats in the cloud, particularly when it comes time to deliver data to downstream stakeholders, whether that's a meteorology team or a trading desk or what have you. Those are all downstream stakeholders. But we see folks exporting their NetCDF data as JSON or CSV, and trying to find a way to get it in the hands of the downstream stakeholders, but really struggling to do that. And so what we've been working on at Earthmover is tooling that allows you to have a single source of truth, one catalog of data, and then to deliver that data through standard compliant APIs, and really clean up what that kind of left to right delivery looks like for scientific data. So this is what the architecture diagram looks like in the Earthmover platform today. So we build on top of cloud service providers, and that includes two main components. So we have Array Lake. So this is our data layer, and it includes Icechunk, which is that open source storage format that I mentioned before, a data catalog, which you'll get to see today, and then a set of tools for doing data governance and management. And then on top of that is our Flux product. So Flux is a stateless, scalable compute layer that can deliver data to downstream applications. So if you want to deliver data via JSON or CSV or Parquet, some slice of your larger data cube, or if you're building a web app or a dashboard type tool, Flux is a gateway that kind of connects between your data in cloud object storage stored in Array Lake all the way to your application. Today, we're mostly going to work with data directly in Array Lake. So we're going to be working in Python, and the most performant and easiest way as like a data scientist to work with this data is just to directly access the raw data. So we're going to be using Xarray and Zarr and Icechunk combined with Array Lake to access the data. This is a bit of an aside, but a quick note on kind of what the workflow looks like, and for many applications in this space. And what we see is that almost every organization has a version of a workflow diagram that looks like this. We're ingesting some data from some raw sources, could be ECMWF or NOAA, could be a private data provider. We're then building a model of our own. Right. So today I'm going to show you three very simple models, but most people have more complicated models that are tuned for their application. And to do that, you have to do process engineering and then eventually model training. And then finally, there's the inference step. So you've built a model. Now it's time to run that model and put it into production. And Earthmover is really a place where you can do all of these steps, all the way out to the far right here, where you're delivering that data to stakeholders via APIs or direct access to the data. Okay, so we're going to move towards the demo now, and along the way, I'm going to show a bit about the Earthmover platform and how that works. We have we've prepared a GitHub repository. Cheryl will put it in the chat here in a second. But before we jump into that, just want to highlight a little bit about what the energy impact was of this storm. And so February 15th was the real make or break day for this storm. And these charts here show part of what happened. And so, there were really severe cold temperatures during the event. And we'll look at that using some reanalysis data here in a second. And so the demand, the electricity demand during the window of this storm was, anomalously high. This was combined with a drop in production on the 15th. That was ultimately what led to the blackout. And you can see here in the upper right that the forecasted demand was, much higher, and then this drop in net generation, and then of course the blackouts led to a drop in actual demand. But this is the gap that the grid failed to meet, and was ultimately the cause of so much of the damages. And we can look at the historical data of production and see that a large part of that drop was a failure of the natural gas system to to maintain the generation that was needed. But there were also other impacts. So if you look at smaller here, nuclear had a drop around the same time, as did wind and solar were not particularly high during those days, as it was relatively windless and fairly cloudy during the core part of the storm. And so, the questions we'll be exploring is like, can we reproduce, the core signals that led to such high demand, and with reanalysis data? And then we'll also take a look at the wind and solar production and try to figure out if this was really impacted by the extreme weather or if it may have been something else, and see if we can model what was happening there. So we've put together a GitHub repository. If you're the sort of person that wants to look at code in detail, this is the place to go. It's already in the chat, so you don't need to write this down. But feel free to look at this. If you want to mostly follow along, I'll be running through the code myself, so you won't you don't need to run anything yourself. So here's what we're going to do for the demo. We are going to take a look at some weather reanalysis and then feed that into an energy demand and production model for both heating degrees and wind and solar production. And the input data here is going to be ECMWF's ERA 5 weather reanalysis. We have that data hourly from 1975 through 2024 right now. And then we took the EIA 860M form. If you don't know what this is, don't worry. It's a list of wind and solar and other generation facilities around the US. We'll subset that down to the Texas grid and then use that so that we know where actual wind and solar facilities were operating at the time of the event. And so we built some simple models. If you want to look at the code, the models are in that GitHub repository. They're simple. If you work in this space, you probably know that these are not the most scientifically rigorous models, but they're plausible. It's a good V0 for how you might do this. And so we have a model for demand. It's heating degree days or heating degree hours in some cases. And that's just a function of temperature. Then we have two production models, one for solar production, and there we use downward solar radiation and temperature. And the same is true for wind. We'll use UND winds at 100 meters and then have some corrections for atmospheric conditions. So the goal in the demo is really to show you how the Earthmover platform, including Icechunk and Xarray, can be used to supercharge modeling and analytics for these kind of energy weather applications. And with that, I'm going to hop into the demo and first just show off the GitHub repository. And I'll just say, this is built just for the demo's purposes. You're welcome to use it. I put an Apache 2 license on it. It's not really a full library or anything like that, but the instructions on how to get started here are there. If you have any problems and you want to take it for a spin yourself, you're welcome to. So that's this repository. I'm going to now switch over to this page. So right now I'm looking at the Earthmover platform's list of public repositories. Okay, so we have a catalog here of a bunch of repositories. Today we're going to be focused on the ERA 5 surface AWS repository. So this is that hourly reanalysis data set that I mentioned previously. And this is publicly available, so you're welcome to log in and take a look at this data set and use it right now. And I'm going to go ahead and click into this and show you a little bit about what this data set looks like. And so what I'm looking at is an Icechunk repository stored in the Earthmover platform. So it lives in AWS S3, and we're going to mostly be working off the temporal group here. So this is a temporal and spatial here represent this chunk scheme that we've used to store the data in storage. And so I'm going to go ahead and look into that temporal group. And what we'll see here is some metadata at the top level. We can see this is the data source from ECMWF and when Earthmover built this data set. But now we have a list of 25 arrays, right? So these are different variables in the ERA 5 reanalysis. And these variables include, U and V winds. They include, air temperature. SSRD is downward shortwave. So these are meteorological conditions, and they're modeled over both a spatial and a temporal domain. And so let's go ahead and look at SSRD. This is that downwind shortwave at the surface. What we can see is that the dimensions of this data set are, it's a three-dimensional data set. So you have time by latitude, by longitude. And it's a very large data set. There's 438,000 points along the time index. And then it's global domain, so full latitude and longitude grid. We can see some more information about how this is stored. This is useful to, say, a data scientist or a data engineer, just understanding what good query patterns would be against this data set. And then finally, we have a set of metadata here. We can see exactly what each of these fields look like. If I switch over to the history tab, we can see the history of how this data set was developed. And you can see it was last updated 10 days ago. And there's a whole, essentially an audit log or a transaction history of how this data set has been curated over time. And the way Icechunk works is these are all immutable snapshots, meaning I can always go back and check out a specific snapshot from any of these versions along the way. Finally, we can look at the storage history here. So we can see that 10 days ago there was an increase. It was 34 terabytes before, and now it's 40 terabytes. And so we can gain some information about how this data set is stored. Okay, I'm going to skip over the settings. We'll leave it here. There's a whole system for managing these data sets, who can access them, and all that sort of thing. Okay, so with that, I'm going to switch over to a Merimo notebook. So I imagine many folks on the call know about Jupyter notebooks. So these are Python notebooks made for kind of interactive data analysis and that sort of thing. Here we're going to be using a different type of notebook, but I hope it's not too much of a distraction. It allows us to do a little more reactive programming and build something that feels more like a dashboard experience at times. So all of this would work in a Jupyter notebook. You can run it on your laptop. You could write the same code in a Python script. Today, we're going to be using Merimo. And I think hopefully everybody finds it fun, because we'll get to build something that's a little more interactive. So at the top here, we are doing some imports. And I should mention the purpose of this first notebook is just to understand the meteorological conditions at the time of the event. And so we're going to import the Array Lake client and some other Python libraries that are going to help us along the way. And the first thing we want to do is find the ERA 5 data set. And so I already showed it to you in the public catalog, but now I want to do the same using Python. And so what I'm showing in this cell here is first we create the Array Lake client, and then we log in. And I already did this ahead of time. And so you can see that I was given a link, and I went and logged in on my browser, and then it redirected me back here. But we've now just listed the Earthmover public organization. And so what we see here is a set of weather forecasts and reanalysis. And so, we have AIFS, that's an AI weather model. We have ERA 5, that's what we'll be using today. But then we also have GFS and HERT, two of NOAA's forecast data sets. And so right here from Python, I'm able to do that same kind of data exploration. And I've already figured out that I want to use this ERA 5 data set. And so we'll continue on. The next thing to do is we're going to run the this command called git repo. So this will help us obtain this Icechunk repository from the catalog. And so we're calling it out by name, and we get a repo object back. And I should note this this notebook, Marimo notebooks are reactive, so I can run these steps along the way, but they're also always in sync. And so I started the notebook up and it ran, and so I'm going to walk you through the steps of how it ran. So what we got back was an Icechunk repository, and the next step here is to open this with Xarray. So if you recall, Xarray is this toolkit and data model for working with multidimensional arrays, labeled arrays. And so here we've opened up the temporal group, and we've also printed out the size. And so this is 40 terabytes in size if we had uncompressed it. So in memory, it would be 40 terabytes. And we can see that time, latitude, and longitude, those are the same things we saw before. But now we have the ability to access these individual data sets. So here's the 10 meter V component of wind, for example. And so this is similar to what we saw in the web app, but now in Xarray. So we can immediately start to use this and query data from it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to slice out just the Texas part, and we're going to get just the Texas Era 5 data set. So this is just a subset. And we're going to start some analysis. And so this first chart is a map of the temperature during the event. So we've sliced out just Texas and just the 4 days of Winter Storm Uri. And what we can see is that most of Texas was spent all of those days at or below freezing temperature. This doesn't happen in Texas very often, and so it was really a remarkable event. The other thing we can notice is that the Era 5 data set says that there was snow on the ground in big parts of Texas. This is another thing that doesn't happen all that often. But plotting that snow depth is also trivial in this case. And so here we can run this and we can see. So that takes about 300 milliseconds, and we have our chart up and going. All right, last thing to show is the just what the temperatures look like at some specific locations. And here we've added a little UI element to allow us to switch between metro areas. And under the hood here is just some Xarray extraction and some plotting. But we can now switch and we can take a look at, say, Dallas, Fort Worth, and in a second or so, we get back the chart that shows us the temperature, hourly temperature there. And we can see that even Dallas Fort Worth spent basically the entire event below freezing. So we can switch around. I'll do one more. We'll go to Laredo and see that. Okay, so that's just an intro. Now we know kind of what happened during the event. It got cold. It stayed cold for a long time. And if you're familiar with meteorology, you'd also recognize that the diurnal cycle basically diminished during this time. So the warm part of the day doesn't really exist in the middle of this storm. It dropped to -5 or -8 degrees in Laredo, but there was no warm part of the day for any of those days. So that's a big part of what happened as well. Okay, so with this in mind, we're now going to go and simulate the heating degree days. So this is a metric of just trying to understand how cold it was relative to the baseline. And so typically people turn their heat on at some threshold, and that's what we're going to simulate, is basically how much heating load there would be from an event like this. And so we'll again use the Era 5 data set, but we'll now have this kind of simple model for a bit of a proxy for what the heating load would be on the energy grid. So similar stuff. I'm going to skip over the how to get an Xarray data set from Era 5 because we just did that. But we have that same data set loaded up here, and we're now ready to calculate our heating degrees. And so we have the air temperature at 2 meters in for all the Era 5 data points over Texas. We've converted it to Celsius, but from there, we're ready to run the model. And so our model, as I mentioned, is quite simple. We have a base temperature. We're going to calculate the difference between that base temperature, and any temperatures that are below that base temperature get counted into the aggregated heating degree metric. And so that's what we have built into our model, and we can run this function that is called calculate heating degree on this entire Texas slice of the of Era 5 in just a second or so. And what happened there is we're now like building up a lazy query or lazy representation of heating degrees. What I mean by lazy is we aren't calculating the whole thing in this step. We're just kind of building up what the mathematics would be behind the scenes. So what we're going to do to kind of show how extreme this event was is compare the actual heating degree metric with the climatology. So this is the long-term climate mean. And we're going to use the climate period of 1990 to 2020. So the 30 or so years leading up to this event. And this will be our baseline, and we'll see kind of how different this event was. And so in this next step, what we're going to do is we're going to select out just the part of the heating degree array from above that that's in that climate epoch. And then we're going to calculate the mean and the standard deviation. And go ahead and run that. Just takes a few seconds. So we're loading all of the Era 5 data set from over that period. And so that's all done now. And now we can build a visualization. And so the goal here is to build a visualization that allows us to compare the heating degree load with the load with the long-term climatology. There's some information here about how we're calculating the chart, but I'll show you this at the end. So here we're Austin, Texas, and you can see that the heating degree is hours in this case kind of jumps off the chart in mid-February, and this is the core part of the event. We have, essentially in this particular location, the heating degree hours goes outside the 3 sigma level. So we certainly could do a more robust statistical analysis on this, but it goes without saying, I think, that this was an extreme event and one that just doesn't really fit with the standard kind of climate normal for what happens in this part of the world. So one last thing is we also have the hourly data available. And so we can take this hourly data and also extract the time series here. And so that's what we've done here is we've extracted just the time series for Austin, Texas, and we can see that the heating degree hours typically range between 0 and 15. But during the event, they were, closer to 15 to 30 for most of that time. So quite extreme. So at this point, we've generated some intuition and put some data behind, what happened both at the meteorological level. So we, looked at the temperature and snow conditions from Era 5, but we've also now modeled a proxy for heating demand. And then the last thing we're going to do is repeat this, but now move on to production. And so the production side requires some different modeling. And oops, I'm down at the bottom of my screen here. But that's what we're going to be doing now. So the approach that we'll use is to build a set of first build a model of wind and solar. And so here we took some kind of basic off-the-shelf approaches to doing that, but and then we're going to feed in hourly meteorological conditions that existed during the event. And then again, we'll compare to the actual production to the climatology. So I'll skip through the how to open this with Xarray piece, and then and get into like how we calculate the renewable power production. And so we have two models that we've built. The first is the solar one. And so here we're going to take the solar radiation at an hourly time step at every location of interest. We're also going to take 2-meter air temperature, and that's used to provide a correction, particularly I think at high temperatures, it matters most. So there's some kind of degrading of performance there. And then there's the wind model. And the wind model takes in a few more variables. It includes wind speed. So in this case, we'll pass in U and V winds at 100 meters and then calculate the wind speed from that. The surface pressure and the temperature are used to provide an air density correction. And then both of these models take a turbine capacity or a facility capacity or nameplate capacity. And so that just allows us to scale the output based on the amount of capacity that this facility would have when it was operational. So we can calculate these for all points on the Earth, these two, and so this is making some assumptions that every pixel in Era 5 has a wind and a solar facility. Obviously, that's not the case, but that does allow us to do prospecting. That's not really the point of this, but I thought I'd show what it looks like. So we've just passed in Era 5 into the renewable production function here. And what we got back was a solar and wind value that we can immediately do analysis on. And so that's what we did here. We just extracted the part from 2024. So this is just over Texas, but is, so we're selecting just the part over Texas. We take the mean. So this is the average power production from wind that could occur at each pixel in Texas. And so you can see a map and you see, okay, so the northern parts of Texas appear to have more wind potential, as do the offshore areas in the Gulf of Mexico. So that's cool. I already learned something, and now we can, potentially use that to think about, where we might be looking to site a facility or something like that. We can also extract there's a typo here. Excuse me. We can extract the time series of hourly production at any point, and so and we'll be using this this fact later on when we've combined this with the production data. Or the facilities data, excuse me. And so now we have, a time series in this case of just a latitude and longitude pair somewhere in Texas. We'll associate this with a facility next. So the next part of the demo here is going to use pandas to open up the EIA table. It's an Excel file that they provide every month. And so we downloaded the one from January 2021. The main point here is that it gives us a table of facilities all over the U.S. And so if I can look over to the side here, and this particular table that you're looking at is just the part from Texas and just the solar part. But this data frame here, and I'll just show it really quick, includes coal and natural gas and a bunch of other facilities as well. So we don't need all of those facilities. We just need the Texas ones. And so what I'm going to show here is just a little bit of code. We don't need to get into it, but how we filter down this data set to just be the solar generators that existed in 2021. So you can see both where they are and their nameplate capacity. You see the largest ones tend to be in Western Texas. And the same is true for the wind facilities. So filter out just the wind facilities that were active in 2021. And sure enough, there's some along the coast, but most of them are in northern Texas. So got that part right. So the next thing we're going to do is use Xarray's vectorized indexing. So this is a really efficient way to extract data sets or just subsets of data sets at at a series of points. And so what's happening here is we take that data frame of all the wind generation facilities, and we're going to select out the ERA 5 data set at just the latitude and longitude points where those sites exist. We do a little bit of data alignment here. We're basically doing a join with this table. And now we can calculate, we've calculated we've extracted just the ERA 5 data set at those points. But we can take that and immediately pass it into our wind model and predict the wind power production at every site. And so that's what we're doing here. And what you can see is, now we have a hourly time series at all 200 wind facilities of wind production. So we can then take that data and calculate the climatology. And so now that we've subset this down, this is a really fast process that took under a second to do that query. And we can take that and put it and sum it across all of the sites, right? And so now instead of looking at the 200 sites, we're looking at the kind of grid-wide production. And that's what's shown here in this chart is the comparison of the total wind production to the climatology. And so, of course, we're looking in February here. And, the thing that really jumps out to me is that based on the wind conditions, the production of wind was actually, forecasted to be not that low in mid-February. In fact, some of the days were much higher than the long-term mean. So this is useful information. We now are seeing that, okay, so, if there was a drop in wind production, it doesn't necessarily seem to have come from the wind conditions themselves. So we can do the same thing for solar production, and we don't need to spend a ton of time on all of the steps because they all basically look the same from what we just did. But I'll just point out that here's where we're passing in those the ERA 5 data for each solar production facility, and in this case, we're passing in solar radiation, temperature, and then scaling that by the nameplate capacity. And we can run that all the way through, and what we see here is something similar to what we saw with the wind, which is that the meteorological conditions led to pretty average solar production for most of February. There is a brief period where it's below average, but also a period where it's above. Hard to see how this, solar being not the largest contributor to the Texas grid, it's hard to see how solar had much of an influence on the blackout. So, the takeaway that I have there is really that, on the renewable side at least, production was fairly nominal. The conditions were that, at least based on the models we have here, didn't really drive a significant reduction in the overall power production, which leads me to think that, is mostly on the operations side. And certainly for the natural gas infrastructure at the time, most of the problems that the grid saw on the production side came from, lack of winterization and that sort of thing. Those are things that aren't, built into the model here. And for wind or solar, or obviously for the other fuel sources. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the kind of interactive part of the demo here. I'll switch back here in a second to the app view of the demand, and then just go ahead and take a few questions. And so just show that, it doesn't really matter where we look in the state of Texas, like the heating degrees were, well above average most of the time. So that's the takeaway from what I learned in my kind of data science deep dive into this event. Now I'll switch back to my slides and just have one wrap-up slide and have some time for discussion and questions. So just to recap what we've talked about, we talked about Winter Storm Uri, how it was a strong winter storm that resulted in billions of dollars of losses for the energy sector. And we use this kind of best-in-class weather reanalysis data set that we've built up at Earthmover to analyze this this event. We use Xarray, Icechunk, and the Array Lake platform to do that. And then finally, the full demo is available on GitHub, and we'll leave it there. So if you're interested in learning more about what we're working on, my email's on the screen. Give us a holler. Happy to set up a time to tell you more about what we're working on. And from there, take some questions. Margaret, I think we've got Q&A open. Is that right?
We do. There are a couple in the queue, and you should be able to see the oldest first.
Okay, oldest first. So a question on from someone here on what data sets to use. And so I'm going to say that, we see folks using there's probably only a half dozen data sets in this space. So there's, a few weather reanalyses. ECMWF's ERA 5 one is the kind of the gold standard there. And so, would encourage you to take a look at that one. On the forecast side, ECMWF has a couple of forecast models. So there's IFS, there's AIFS, which is a new AI forecast model. And then on the NOAA side, there's GFS and HER and GEFS, is an ensemble forecast. There's a bunch of options. And we have some of those in our platform today, and we're onboarding additional ones now. And so would love to know kind of what your application is and figure out kind of what the right data set is for you. But basically, you've got options, and you just need to think about a little bit kind of what are the timeframes that you're trying to forecast over and what resolution is important to you. All right, next question is, have you thought about combining weather and power systems by combining Earthmover with the Pi PSA framework? Would love to do that. And that's not something that we've built into this particular demo, but believe it would be possible. I looked at the Pi PSA framework a while back. And so I think that, we're in a position, specifically with the ability to process these large weather data sets really efficiently, that we can potentially do that. So Arjun, if that's something you would be interested in collaborating on, be happy to have a conversation about that. Cool. Okay, I'm going to scroll down. I got a question here from Taylor. Are there differences in server-side I/O speed or efficiency utilizing Earthmover hosted Icechunk stores compared to, say, Google hosted ERA 5? And so, especially thinking about like how the backend computation works, assuming that like most of the data set is the same in terms of how it's chunked and that sort of thing. So yeah, this is a good question. And the answer is mostly that Icechunk, remember Icechunk is that storage backend that we use for Zarr, was really built to maximize IO throughput. And so I think the answer here is definitely yes. The ability to stream data out of object store as performantly as possible is one of the core design objectives of Icechunk. And the Arco ERA 5 data set, which was mentioned before, is just in a regular Zarr container. And so I would expect that the exact same data set put into Icechunk will perform better than Icechunk. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. All right, I'm going to scroll down. We got a couple more questions. Oh, this one's from Margaret. All right, so Alex has a question. How would it be different to treat the output of machine learning weather models as data products? Physics-based models like ERA 5 are expensive to produce, but machine learning outputs are not. Do we treat forecasts for both in the same way? Yeah, this is a good question. And I'll switch over briefly to the Earthmover catalog and just show an example from AIFS. So AIFS is ECMWF's operational AI weather forecast. And we did a webinar on this a few months back. And so I think we can put in the chat a link to that particular webinar. But the point is, we can simulate the same set of fields. So I'm just grabbing the last one. I did a demo with this on Monday. So this was when this was last updated. But you can see a similar set of fields produced by AIFS. And these are shorter. These are just 16 time steps into the future. And so, but the fields are the same. So the question is, should we, first off, it's pretty cheap to reproduce these. So maybe you don't need to keep all of the forecasts indefinitely, unless you want to do historical analysis. And then you really do need to have a place where you can store them to enable that. And so, yeah, I think there's trade-offs in, whether or not which parts of these forecasts you keep and all of that. But, fundamentally they're the same thing. Era 5 is basically a forecast fed in with all the best data that that they can find after the fact of it. Cool. Okay, so now we got a question from Jeff. People don't have to say these are noob questions. These are all great questions. So I'll skip that part of the question here. But how do you optimize your chunking for each data set? Is it trial and error, or is there some framework you're following? So yeah, let me switch over to the Era 5 one just to demonstrate a little bit of how we've done this for one data set. But the TLDR is this is the sort of thing we want to handle for you. And in the meantime, in the short term, we have some good heuristics that we can offer. In the long term, we'd love to have this be something that just lives as an optimization that sits behind the scenes. So what we have here is two essentially identical copies of the Era 5 data set, right? One chunked for temporal analysis. That's the one we used in the demo today. But then also another one for spatial analysis. So those are like map size chunks if I wanted to look at a single time point over all points on the Earth. And we can look at what that chunk scheme looks like. I'll just grab one of the arrays. You can see time by latitude by longitude. Oops, I clicked into temporal. So you can see that the temporal chunking here, the latitude and longitude chunk size is pretty small. And this is really meant to improve the performance of doing time series extractions. And the same is true for the spatial chunking. So now we'll see the inverse. We have a chunk size of 1 along the time step. And so it really depends on how you want to query. Today, it really depends on how you want to query the data. If you want to, if you're going to be mostly doing time series analysis, then the temporal chunking makes sense. There are some kind of in the middle, we call them Goldilocks chunking schemes that if you really want to have one copy of the data and optimize it for kind of a middle of the road approach, then that's also an option. Great. Okay, I think I've exhausted all the questions. I should have been checking them along the way. All the questions in the Q&A section. Happy to take more. So feel free to drop one in there. Or I don't know if folks can raise their hand as well, but would be happy to take more questions. All right, so I got another question here from Arjun. Moving forward, what's Earthmover's strategy? Are you focusing on improving weather data access or building new products? Both, absolutely both. Many of our customers are working with high resolution weather and climate data sets. And so it's absolutely a core part of our objective to improve how folks access these data sets and improving the kind of connective tissue in the ecosystem from the software to the data providers to the cloud providers and all of that. And so absolutely we want to improve the access to weather data, but we're also working on the product, right? So our experience as practitioners really taught us that we're missing a layer of infrastructure in the cloud for working with this type of data. And so for the weather data that access piece to work, we also need to continue working on the Earthmover platform. And so absolutely expect more product development as we go. Last question here in the chat is, will we have access to the recording? Absolutely. If you signed up for this and showed up here, we've got an email address for you and we will send you the recording afterwards. It'll also land on our YouTube page where all the prior webinars that we've done are. All right, one more question. I love it. They keep coming. Yeah, how can we connect weather data to nodal level electricity data using Earthmover? Yeah, so this is quite similar to what I did with the production part of this, right? So the nodes were discrete facilities, and there were only a few hundred, but we absolutely support kind of extraction along a transmission line or something like that. And so it really depends how you want to model and extract those discrete points. But yeah, the partial access or partial subsetting of Zarr data using Xarray works great. And we see folks doing just that all the time. And so, and if you have questions about that, happy to show you more about how it would work, but absolutely that's supported. All right, cool. Well, we are at time and there's no more questions. I'm gonna pause for just a few, oh, yes, more came. I'm gonna not pause, I'm gonna do the question. So can this data extraction and generation be put in a workflow with Python as a daily run, for example? Absolutely, yes. I could take this IFS data that I was showing previously and put it into the exact same models. I could put that in a Python script. I could run it as a batch job in my Airflow cluster or DAS cluster, whatever it is that I'm using. And so, yeah, 100%. What I showed today was just an interactive notebook style way of showing you this. That's more fun than showing you a batch job that's running in a cluster somewhere. But yeah, absolutely. To put this into operations, you're going to write a Python script and you're going to run this on a schedule or on a trigger or something like that. And that's definitely something we support. So, okay, very good. Well, want to thank everyone for coming. This was great. Really appreciate the questions. Hopefully this was useful to you. Again, we'll be following up. We'll send you an email with both the link to the demo materials and the video here in the coming days. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thanks for coming.